branch agree. If you go to the State Department's website, you will see the Trump administration has designated Haiti as a level 4 code red do not travel because of the multi-layered humanitarian crises of natural disasters, gang violence, and political instability impacting the island. That's why TPS is warranted in this moment. And Secretary Rubio knows that. In fact, when he was in the Senate, it was Rubio who authored the very legislation we are voting on today. And it's not just him who agrees. The U.S. Ambassador, the United Nations, Mike Waltz, has repeatedly discussed the dire conditions of Haiti and its strategic importance to our national security. Ambassador Waltz, who was recently a Republican in this very body, believes we should be working to stabilize Haiti. He knows that the international effort to restore order in Port-au-Prince would be undermined if we deport hundreds of thousands of Haitians to the island. But this isn't just about foreign policy. Secretary Kennedy of the Department of Health and Human Services said something families across the country already know too well, that America is facing a caregiver crisis. But Mr. Speaker, if we were to deport Haitians, we would lose even more nurses, aides, and caregivers that we desperately need. Those jobs can't be replaced by AI. So the solution is clear. I urge my colleagues to vote yes to extend TPS because it's the economic thing to do, it's the strategic thing to do, it's the humane thing to do, but most of all, it is the right thing to do. I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentlelady yields back without objection. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The noes have it.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1174, I call up H.R. 6409 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 514, H.R. 6409, a bill to amend the Clean Air Act to clarify standards for emissions emanating from outside the United States and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1174, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, and the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks on the legislation and to insert extraneous material on H.R. 6409.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6409, the Fences Act, which addresses the need for common sense reforms on how emissions impact our nation's ability to support domestic manufacturing and unleash affordable and reliable energy. For far too long, burdensome regulations have stood in the way, allowing investments to go overseas while Americans are forced to pay higher prices. Many of these costly regulations result from regulatory burdens associated with the Clean Air Act. The legislation considered today makes targeted and effective reforms that will support American job creators while continuing to protect our environment and the air we breathe. The legislation produced by my colleague, Congressman August Pfluger of Texas, ensures that states and local communities are not penalized for foreign air emissions emanating from outside our borders. Across the country, states are being unfairly penalized for pollution that originates from foreign nations, including air emissions from natural events like the Canadian wildfires. Currently, the Clean Air Act allows states to adjust their plans when foreign emissions prevent them from meeting federal standards. However, the guidance from the EPA under the previous administration narrowed that relief, limiting it to only human-caused emissions from abroad. This bill clarifies that all foreign emissions, whether natural or man-made, are excluded from consideration when determining whether a state meets national air quality standards. Importantly, the bill allows states to account for foreign emissions earlier in the regulatory process instead of forcing them to wait until the very end and risk costly delays or federal sanctions. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting these bills. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 6409, the Fences Act. Access to quality and affordable health care is an issue that is at the top of many Americans' minds right now as they struggle through the ever-worsening Republican affordability crisis. Republicans have demonstrated over the last year that they have no interest in improving health care for American people. The Republican Big Ugly Bill cut more than $1 trillion from Americans' health care. Insurance premiums spiked at the beginning of the year for 20 million people because Republicans refused to extend the ACA tax credits. 15 million people are projected to lose their health care altogether, and hospitals are closing in record numbers around the country. There was a media report just yesterday that said 15 hospitals in my state of New Jersey have the potential to close because of the Republican Big Ugly Bill and the impact on hospitals. And now there are reports that Republicans intend to make further cuts and take health care away from more people to pay for Trump's reckless war of choice with Iran. In Trump's America, we can't afford health care, but apparently we can spend $1 billion a day on the war in Iran. In fact, Trump himself said that it's not possible for the federal government to pay for Medicaid and Medicare when we're fighting wars. Well, Republican attacks on Americans' health care continue this week here on the House floor by bringing 3 dirty air bills to the House floor, including this bill, H.R. 6409, the Fences Act, and also H.R. 6398, the Red Tape Act, and finally H.R. 6387, the Fire Act. These bills are an attack on the public health protections that are a cornerstone of the Clean Air Act. They will ultimately make Americans sicker and increase healthcare costs even more. The health harms of air pollution are well documented and being felt by communities across the country. Communities in areas with unsafe levels of air pollution see more diagnosis of diseases like asthma, COPD, heart disease, and certain types of cancer, all of which require long-term treatment and medication. Air pollution, Mr. Speaker, is also responsible for over 100,000 premature deaths every year. and it's ridiculous to even consider these bills when our constituents are demanding action on health care affordability. Whether it's from reducing transparency to artificially reducing air pollution reporting by ignoring climate change to giving corporate polluters free passes on Clean Air Act requirements, these bills are evidence that Republicans are more interested in helping their pollution friends than the well-being of Americans. Now, the bill we're talking about now, the Fences Act, would undercut the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, which tells us the amount of air pollution that is safe to breathe. The bill would have us ignore bad air quality in areas that experience any pollution beyond the jurisdiction, could be a state or the city's borders. It removes the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to impose fees or sanctions on states that fail to make progress towards cleaning up the air. Let me just explain this. So if my hometown of Long Branch or my county of Monmouth or my state of New Jersey was getting pollution from outside that particular jurisdiction, it wouldn't count. They wouldn't have to account for that in terms of dealing with air pollution and trying to reduce it. Well, I mean, to me, that's patently ridiculous because we know that air pollution travels across cities, across states, even across countries. So giving states that are not even trying to improve air quality a free pass for pollution without any incentive to fix the problem is not the right way to proceed, and that's what this bill does. If signed into law, this bill would require EPA to cook the books on air pollution in favor of industry, removing all accountability for states to clean up air pollution and leaving millions of Americans to breathe unhealthy air. The only winners here are corporate polluters who would get to save a few dollars in compliance costs. Now, Republican attempts to undermine the NAAQS aren't new. Every time that EPA strengthens an air quality standard, opponents complain that stronger public health standards will limit economic growth, but that's never been true, Mr. Speaker. Every time, industry has innovated better pollution control measures to meet the new standards. Republicans also claim that the Fences Act is part of their permitting reform effort, but this bill would not speed up any permitting. In fact, it would cause complete permitting gridlock in areas with pollution that exceeds an air quality standard. This is not permitting reform. The House Republicans are trying to use accounting gimmicks to make areas with poor air quality appear much better to benefit corporate polluters at the expense of the health of Americans across the country. Pushing the Fences Act at a moment when millions of Americans are struggling to afford their utilities, their groceries, and health care, in my opinion, is unconscionable. And so I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always interesting to me to hear my Democratic colleagues talk about where Republicans are on health care when, in fact, it was Republicans who initiated the $50 billion Rural Health Transformation Fund that every Democrat voted against. As a matter of fact, in New Jersey, just this year, the state of New Jersey is going to get $147,250,806 from the Rural Health Transformation Fund. And I think that's a pretty good investment in trying to improve health care for people all over the country. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the sponsor of the bill, the distinguished member from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of my bill, the Foreign Emissions and Non-Attainment Clarification for Economic Stability Act, also known as the Fences Act. States and communities are being pushed into non-attainment because of pollution that they don't control, that they can't prevent. And as was just mentioned by my colleague from New Jersey who said that we can't control pollution across borders, that's right. And that's why we have to come up with this bill. Smoke from Canadian wildfires, emissions drifting across our southern border or other foreign sources can overwhelm local air quality readings even when the states are fully compliant and acting in good faith. And Congress has long recognized this reality. That is why the Clean Air Act allows states to account for foreign emissions when those emissions interfere with attainment. But that balance was disrupted when EPA guidance under the Biden administration sharply narrowed what counts as foreign emissions, limiting relief to certain human-caused sources while excluding events like wildfires, and that distinction was arbitrary and unworkable. States cannot regulate another country, and they certainly cannot regulate natural disasters. The Fences Act corrects that mistake. In fact, let me change that phrasing. The Fences Act corrects that overreach by the previous administration, and it clarifies that all foreign emissions, whether natural or human-caused, must be excluded when the EPA makes non-attainment determinations or reviews new source permits. And just as importantly, the bill allows states to raise these issues earlier in the process rather than years after the planning and investment have happened when the consequences are most severe. And those consequences are significant. Non-attainment designations impose substantial regulatory burdens on states, communities, energy producers, and manufacturers, and they trigger stricter permitting requirements, delay infrastructure projects, and raise the cost for businesses trying to expand or hire. For energy producers, it means slower approvals for drilling and processing, and for manufacturers, it means uncertainty around whether a project will even move forward. For local communities, it means fewer jobs and less investment, even when they have done everything right to comply with the law. And the issue is not theoretical. In my area, the Permian Basin, we saw how even the possibility, the threatening of non-attainment in that designation can create uncertainty. That uncertainty affects permitting timelines, capital planning, and long-term investment decisions for both producers and local communities. Companies begin to question whether new jobs will face delays or additional requirements, and local leaders are left planning around an unclear regulatory future. When the stakes are that high, EPA needs to get the analysis right. That's the way the law was written, and this bill gets us back to that intent. And it was said that this bill favors the dirty production and manufacturing and lowers that air quality. No, it actually holds our communities accountable. It holds them accountable. The communities that we care about domestically that should be held accountable, but shouldn't be penalized for cities in Mexico or wildfires that are happening in Canada or other foreign sources that they don't control. And that's what this bill does. When the Supreme Court decided on the Loper-Bright case, that's the Chevron deferent case, this is the decision they had in mind because the Biden administration overreached so often and so critically. This bill is targeted, common sense measure that does not change air quality standards. In fact, it actually enforces them more accurately within our local communities, and it makes a narrow adjustment to ensure that compliance determinations are fair by excluding foreign emissions from EPA non-attainment designations. American workers and businesses should not face regulatory penalties for pollution originating outside our borders or uncontrollable natural events. I urge my colleagues to think about a common sense solution and to get back to the intent of the law, which is exactly what the Fences Act does, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman reserve?
Gentleman reserves.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd yield 4 minutes now to the ranking member of our Environment Subcommittee, Mr. Tonko from New York.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from New Jersey for yielding. When we debated this bill in committee, I was reminded of the environmental history of the Adirondack Mountains, which are located just to the north of my district in upstate New York. The Adirondacks are known for their beauty, as well as the ecological damage they suffered from acid rain. That acid rain was caused by polluting power plants in the Midwest, and that pollution didn't stop in upstate New York. It also harmed people and the environment in eastern Canada. The international pressure brought by the Canadian government helped motivate the Bush administration and Congress to enact the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, which included a program to control sources of acid rain pollution. In that case, American industries were the polluters, but it demonstrates how international cooperation in pursuit of our common environmental goals is indeed possible. States and counties burdened by foreign pollution sources should be able to rely upon their federal government to address these issues through bilateral discussions with the polluting country. And we should be able to have a bipartisan consensus in Congress that we would like our environmental and diplomatic efforts to prioritize these issues in our international relations. Of course, it should be a national imperative that we collectively demand polluters in Mexico and China or any other country that may be proven to be contributing to an area's non-attainment of a Clean Air Act standard to do something to control their pollution. I understand that states and counties may be frustrated by pollution sources from outside their jurisdiction, but the lungs of the people living and working in those areas don't care from whence that pollution originated. It affects their health all the same. So I don't think the answer can be to simply ignore the problem of Americans breathing unsafe levels of air pollution. States and local air agencies should continue to work with EPA to find ways to better protect people while also allowing for opportunities to prove when emissions originate from outside their borders. And thankfully, that is already how the Clean Air Act works, making this bill unnecessary. Section 179B of the Clean Air Act currently gives states that opportunity to prove emissions came from an international source and provides regulatory relief when an area would have otherwise achieved the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Instead, this bill allows states to completely ignore international pollution in their state implementation plans, and it provides free passes on pollution that comes from outside the area, from exceptional events, and from mobile source pollution. The bill blocks EPA's ability to impose sanctions on states that fail to make progress toward reducing air pollution, including states that are not even trying to improve air quality. So, I agree that we should be working to better protect our constituents from having to breathe pollution from foreign sources, but pretending that pollution doesn't exist simply cannot be the answer. With that, I urge members to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, the distinguished member, Mr. Valadeo.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to urge support for the Fences Act, a common-sense bill that brings fairness and clarity to how we evaluate air quality in the United States. In California, our communities are already working hard to meet some of the most stringent environmental standards in the country. But too often they're penalized for factors completely outside their control, like pollution or wildfire smoke that comes from outside our borders. The Fences Act clarifies that emissions coming from other countries, whether caused by human activity or natural events, cannot be used to determine whether a state is meeting federal air quality standards. The bill also strengthens existing law under the Clean Air Act by allowing states to account for foreign emissions earlier in the process rather than waiting until final stages of their state implementation plans. For California, where in non-attainment designations can have serious economic consequences, the reliability is important. Right now, businesses across the Central Valley and throughout our state face significant permitting delays and regulatory uncertainty. I hear from small businesses all the time who want to invest and hire in our region, but they're stuck navigating a system that doesn't reflect our global's realities. In some cases, these challenges actually push investment overseas to countries with much weaker environmental standards, which ultimately undermines the very goal we're trying to achieve here in the United States. I think we can all agree that our communities to be healthy, we want our communities to be healthy while also providing opportunity for economic investment. The Fences Act helps provide a level playing field by providing regulatory clarity, streamlining the permitting process, and giving states like California a fair shot at compliance while still maintaining our commitment to clean air. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, which strikes the balance between reasonable environmental standards and allowing industry to invest in America to help build our economy and create jobs. Thank you, and I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield 4 minutes now to the gentleman from Ohio, a member of our committee, Mr. Landsman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Pallone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. America's in the middle of a healthcare crisis. More and more Americans can't afford their health care. They just can't pay for it. Hospitals are cutting back services. Many of them are closing their doors. And then Trump and congressional Republicans made things much worse when they spent trillions of dollars on tax cuts that mostly benefited the wealthy. And to pay for it, they kicked about 15 million Americans off their health insurance. $1 trillion cut to health care for tax cuts for the wealthy. Then they refused to give 24 million Americans a break on buying health care. And now this week, congressional Republicans are bringing 3 bills to the floor that will make it harder for people to breathe. One of those bills, the so-called Fences Act, directs the EPA to use accounting gimmicks that will allow industries to pollute our air without consequences. It's an air pollution bill. This bill will make Americans sicker while Trump and congressional Republicans have cut health care for millions of Americans. Congress should be focused entirely on expanding health care and protecting our air and water. Fortunately, the Senate won't take these bills up, and they're not going anywhere. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to talk about Republican positions on health care, and I will remind them again. In particular, the state of Ohio received $202,030,262 from the Rural Health Transformation Fund that every Democrat voted against. So I would remind my colleagues that the Republicans have made a major investment in health care. For that, Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to the chairman of the full committee, the distinguished gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman from Alabama yielding, and I appreciate his hard work because of the Rural Transformation Health Care Fund that was in the One Big Beautiful Bill. His originated the idea, and we certainly appreciate his hard work on that. But today I rise to support H.R. 6409, the Fences Act, H.R. 6398, the Red Tape Act, and H.R. 6387, the Fire Act. These three bills are an essential part of the committee's broader efforts on permitting reform and align with the White House permitting priorities, which include modernizing the Clean Air Act. A lot has changed since 1990, the last time the Clean Air Act got a substantive overhaul. Some parts of the law have become outdated, contributing to the regulatory gridlock that is stifling American growth and innovation. A lot has changed since 1990, the last time the Clean Air Act got a substantive overhaul, and some parts of the law have become outdated, contributing also to more gridlock. These bills are foundational to our permitting reform efforts because they illustrate ways we protect public health and the environment while removing outdated provisions that are slowing energy production and manufacturing, ultimately preventing job creation. The Energy and Commerce Committee has held multiple hearings this Congress on the process for establishing and implementing national air quality standards and improving the pre-construction permitting program without sacrificing environmental protections. Some of the most expensive and significant barriers in the permitting process are the result of law's outdated provisions. What's worse, these burdensome requirements fail to address the most significant sources of pollution and create disincentives for companies to invest in cost-efficient, effective technology that would actually improve air quality. In the U.S., it takes 80% longer to permit projects than elsewhere in the world. America's outdated permitting system costs manufacturers in the U.S. approximately $7.9 billion each year. While a reasonable level of permitting is, of course, needed, without common sense reforms, our nations risk falling behind our adversaries like China. Notably, over 70% of projects require Clean Air Act permits, which have the most burdensome approval process of any permitting requirement. Notably, over 70% of the projects, they require these permits, and these three bills remove regulatory uncertainty and bureaucratic hoops that impact what job creators build here to build new businesses, but do not change the underlying environmental protections in the law. The Fences Act, introduced by Congressman Pfluger, ensures that states and local communities are not penalized for foreign air emissions emanating outside of the U.S. The Fences Act clarifies that all foreign emissions, whether natural or man-made, are not considered when determining whether a state meets national air quality standards. The Fences Act protects manufacturers and communities from unnecessary compliance burdens caused by events beyond their control, such as pollution from China or foreign wildfires or dust storms, while upholding environmental standards under the Clean Air Act. The Red Tape Act, introduced by Congressman Joyce, eliminates a duplicative environmental review for projects already subject to NEPA environmental review. The duplicative process leads to additional delays and costs in the NEPA process. The Fire Act, introduced by Congressman Gabe Evans and co-led by Congressman Adam Gray, updates the Clean Air Act to address the biggest threat in air pollution this country faces today: wildfires. Bipartisan legislation ensures that states are not punished for prescribed burns or emissions they cannot control. Prescribed burns are the most effective tool to decrease the severity of wildfires and public health problems associated with wildfire smoke. Despite the widespread acceptance of benefits of prescribed burns, they are underutilized across the U.S. due to perverse regulatory burdens under current air quality laws. Urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 6409, the Fences Act, the Red Tape Act, and the Fire Act. These bills provide common sense solutions and long-needed updates to the Clean Air Act. I will yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes now to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Menifee.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Representative Pallone. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition of the Fences Act. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about protecting public health and the environment and without sacrificing environmental protection in this country, but I want to point out that it is this administration currently in office that has eviscerated the EPA. And time after time, we've seen these bills filed that are intended to weaken our environmental protection. Let me be clear about what the Fences Act actually does. It weakens the Clean Air Act. It removes EPA's ability to hold states accountable when they fail to reduce air pollution. And it gives polluters a free pass in communities that can least afford it. I represent Houston, Texas. In my district, environmental justice is not a talking point. It's a reality that people wake up to each and every day. We have communities that have some of the highest concentrations of industrial pollution in the entire country. Communities with more than 5 polluting facilities in a 2-mile radius. Cancer clusters, high rates of lung disease and heart disease, lower life expectancies, children and seniors breathing in some of the most contaminated air in America. These communities don't need us here in Washington making it worse. And I know firsthand what happens when you take the pressure off of state environmental regulators. Before I came to Congress, I served as the chief legal officer for Harris County, the largest county in Texas, and I watched the state's environmental regulators look the other way when pollution ran rampant in underserved communities. They sat on cancer clusters, they let polluting facilities concentrate in neighborhoods that had no political power to fight back, and they handed passes to industry while residents got sick. I had to sue them to get them to act, but that's not how our government should work. The federal government has to hold these folks accountable when they put industry over people and put our communities' health at risk. But this bill would add yet another obstacle to holding those in power accountable. Here's what the Fences Act actually does. Under current law, states already get credit when pollution blows in from other countries or from out of state. They are not penalized for pollution that they cannot control. That protection exists today. This bill doesn't fix a gap. It tears open a new one. It expands that exemption so broadly that states can point to foreign pollution as a reason to stop making progress on air quality altogether. It removes the EPA's ability to hold them accountable. It's a built-in excuse to look the other way. And state regulators and polluters both know exactly how to exploit it, and they will. That's why I tried to change this bill by submitting an amendment. It said one simple thing, that before this law takes effect, the Secretary of Health and Human Services must certify that the impacts will not harm children and the elderly. That's it. Prove that this is safe for our kids and our seniors before it takes effect. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle blocked it. They would not allow that vote. They couldn't say yes to that because this bill was never about clean air. It's about giving corporate polluters cover while the people in our districts pay with their health. Over 100 million Americans already live in
Gentleman's
counties.
time has expired.
Give the gentleman an additional minute or two.
Thank you, Rep. Pallone.
Gentleman is recognized.
Over 100 million Americans already live in counties with unhealthy air quality. Air pollution contributes to more than 100,000 premature deaths in this country each and every year. The people in our communities are not abstractions. They're already on the wrong side of these numbers. This body lets pollution run rampant. As our communities see poison is the wind that blows and wonder, where did all the blue skies go? We should be standing up to make sure that every single person in our communities has clean land, clean air, and clean water, regardless of their zip code or socioeconomic status. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the Fences Act, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman bringing up the situation that people in rural America find themselves in. What we tried to do with the One Big Beautiful Bill with the Rural Health Transformation Fund was meet a lot of those needs. The state of Texas got more money than any other state, $319,361 to try to improve health care opportunities for people who live in disadvantaged areas. But also what we're trying to do is improve those conditions, to give people an opportunity to have a better job, to have better options in food, and have better health care options as well. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with these, with the modernization of the Clean Air Act and these bills that we are bringing before the House today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, the distinguished member Juan Ciscomani.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Palmer, for yielding me time to speak in support of H.R. 6409, the Fences Act. This common sense legislation ensures that American communities and manufacturers are not penalized for pollution that they cannot control. Emissions from foreign countries, wildfires, and dust storms should not determine whether our states meet federal air quality standards. The Fences Act restores the original intent of the Clean Air Act by clarifying that foreign emissions, whether natural or man-made, are excluded from compliance determinations and permitting decisions. It also allows states to account for these emissions earlier in the regulatory process, providing certainty and preventing costly delays. For border communities like those I represent in southern Arizona, this is about fairness. Our districts should not face economic penalties for pollution originating beyond our own borders. The Fences Act strengthens regulatory certainty, supports American jobs, and upholds our nation's environmental standards. It is also widely supported by the business community and will ensure we are creating an environment in which industry can thrive. I strongly believe that when we manufacture here in America, we do it better and cleaner than anywhere else in the world. And this legislation is essential in supporting American innovation and excellence across a wide variety of sectors from mining to chips manufacturing. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes now to the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Decatur.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from New Jersey. I rise today in strong and vehement opposition to these bills, specifically the Fences Act, that gut the Clean Air Act's core public health protections. Before the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970, pollution choked American cities. It blanketed entire communities in a toxic haze so thick that residents were reported to believe they were under chemical attack. In Los Angeles, smog burned eyes and seared lungs. In my hometown of Portland, an industrial hub, smokestacks filled the skies with black plumes. Children walked to school clutching handkerchiefs over their faces. Drivers crashed on the highway because they couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Families were scared, they were sick, and they were desperate for change. That's the reality my Republican colleagues are now trying to drag us back to. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards are one of the most important tools we have to protect health. They set limits on dangerous pollution and ensure communities know when the air they breathe is unsafe. These bills would undermine those standards, allowing states to sidestep them and leave the public in the dark about real health risks. As a lung doctor, I know exactly what that means. It means more asthma attacks, more heart attacks, more strokes, more cancer diagnoses, more children in the ER. We've seen this play out time and time again, and today I cannot help wonder, when are we going to learn our lesson? In places like Cancer Alley, families wake up every day knowing the air they breathe is making them sick. Communities are living with higher rates of cancer, respiratory illness, and premature death. Real people, real families, bearing the cost of decisions made right here. And it's not just one place. Across the country and communities living near the major sources of pollution, we see the same pattern. When standards are weakened and accountability disappears, people pay with their health. This is not what the people of Oregon sent me here to do. They sent me here to fight for healthy communities, for clean air, for safe water, and a better future for our children. I will not sit silently while this body rolls back life-saving protections that have put polluters on watch. I urge my colleagues to reject these bills. Our children are watching, history is watching, and the air we breathe is on the line. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I would like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 6409, the Fences Act. Washington has ignored a simple fact that every Arizona knows firsthand. 80% of the air pollution in Maricopa County, Arizona's largest county with a population of approximately 5.5 million people, is caused by natural phenomena or international transport. Wildfire smoke from California, Canada, and Mexico, dust storms across the desert, and emissions drifting in from China and Mexico are all outside our control. Yet Arizona was penalized with stricter federal mandates threatening jobs and growth in one of the fastest growing regions in America. And that makes no sense because Arizona, and Maricopa County specifically, is home to economic and technological development that will better the lives of Arizonans and Americans nationwide. From semiconductor manufacturing to aerospace and national defense facilities, Arizona is building the industries that keep America competitive. These employers depend on fair, predictable permitting, not rules that punish us for pollution blowing in from another country. Arizona's leaders have invested in real outreach and compliance tools that have cut controllable emissions by 50% since 2000. But no state should be forced to impose more regulations on families and small businesses for pollution that they did not cause, nor can they remedy. That's exactly why the Fences Act is necessary. The Fences Act restores the original intent of the Clean Air Act by making clear that all foreign emissions, natural or man-made, are excluded when EPA conducts air quality reviews. Democrats would continue to penalize states like Arizona for these uncontrollable sources. Democrats want to continue to impose costly delays, federal sanctions, and unnecessary burdens on manufacturers, communities, and states. Earlier this year, President Trump and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin recognized the impact of these onerous rules and stopped their negative effects in Maricopa County. But no state should have to rely on the unpredictability and capriciousness of any administration. Congress must act so that no future EPA can arbitrarily punish Arizona or any state for emissions beyond our borders. The Fences Act is grounded in sound science and common sense. It protects jobs, supports investment, and ensures environmental rules focus on what states can actually control. I urge my colleagues to support the Fences Act. Let's pass it today. Thank you. I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Mint.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today in a strong opposition to H.R. 6409, the Fences Act, which would gut the Clean Air Act. For over 60 years, the Clean Air Act has stood as our nation's landmark air pollution law, serving as our most effective tool to try to keep the air that our children and families breathe safe and to hold polluters accountable. Despite this achievement, we still have more than 100,000 people prematurely dying in the United States every year because of air pollution. That's simply unacceptable. We should be building on the progress of the Clean Air Act, not gutting it. We should be decarbonizing transportation, regulating carbon emissions, acknowledging that climate change is happening, that the science is real, and trying to improve air quality and reduce the climate trends that we're seeing that's so alarming. Instead, we're debating another bill that would give yet another free pass to corporations and billionaires at the expense of working families. Now, I understand my colleagues across the aisle are debating right now, and we'll introduce later today, a bill to rename the Big Ugly Bill into something more maybe palatable to the masses. They're doing that because the Big Ugly Bill is so unpopular right now that they're trying to run away from it as fast as possible. And I have a news flash for you all. It's not the name that's the problem. It's the substance of the bill, which helps, again, the Epstein elites that you all are protecting so hard, and does it at the expense of the working class, in this case with the Fences Act, by gutting the Clean Air Act and polluting our air and water. The bill before us today is yet another attack on the Clean Air Act that we cannot afford. The Fences Act would pave the way for states to avoid their responsibility to improve air quality and protect public health by claiming air pollution in their state as a foreign source. Now, this bill is completely unnecessary because under current law, states are not penalized for pollution they can't control, such as from foreign sources or other states. This is a solution in search of a problem. It's important to remember that air pollution doesn't vanish when we don't see it. It moves across national borders, has deadly impacts on Americans here at home. And as a reminder, not too long ago, in the 1960s and 70s, Los Angeles, just up the 405 from where I live in Orange County, was one of the most polluted cities in the world, with smog so pervasive that people reported burning eyes and extremely low visibility. Because of landmark laws like the Clean Air Act and efforts by state and local governments, air pollution in Los Angeles has significantly been reduced, driving down chronic health impacts and having notable and statistically proven quality of life improvements for millions of Californians in Southern California. For these reasons, at the appropriate time, I plan to offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. And if the House rules had permitted, I would have offered the motion with an important amendment to this bill. My amendment would ensure that this bill does not go into effect until the EPA and Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee certify that the act will not increase health harms or the costs associated with treating those harms. I ask unanimous consent to insert to the record the text of this amendment.
Without objection.
I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for the motion to recommit. I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think we want to follow the California model for America's economic future with the high energy prices, the highest poverty rate in the country, destructive economic policies driving businesses out of the state. I think Republican policies, it's very clear that we have the best interest of the people at heart. For that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of H.R. 6409, the Fences Act. Thank my good friend from Alabama for holding this hearing. You may not think of my home state of Idaho as a border state when you start thinking about border states. But Idaho is a border state. We share an international border with Canada on the northern panhandle of the state of Idaho. And there is a lot of timber on both sides of that borderline. And especially in a dry year like this, and this is going to be a dry year for us, it is not uncommon to have wildfire break out on one side or the other. And it's happened many times before. Unfortunately, it will probably happen again where on the Canadian side, a wildfire breaks out. And oftentimes, that smoke, those pollutants, blow right over the border, and there's absolutely nothing that the state of Idaho can do with that. Sometimes we'll share some firefighting resources, but the bottom line is it didn't break out in our forest. So it is true that the Clean Air Act has a provision to address that. But what's not being brought up, at least consistently, is there's also a conflict with that through the EPA. EPA guidance, largely enforced with the previous administration, conflicts with that Clean Air Act provision allowing states to adjust their emission plans. And every time one of those fires break out, then we become at risk of falling out of our emission standards. So, Mr. Speaker, all this does, this is a really pretty simple bill. All it does is it ensures a fair and consistent ability for these air quality designations to be put in place. And so I stand in strong support of that. That's just one example. There's many other examples that some of my colleagues have brought up already, but it's not fair for states to be penalized for something that's out of their control. And this simply takes steps in order to put fair and consistent air quality designations in place. That's it. So I stand in strong support of H.R. 6409 and urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my colleague if